Okay, today's topic, leading for longevity, how to lead people and inspire them to stay. Retention as a competitive advantage is huge right now just because people have so many more opportunities today than they ever have in the career space. And depending on what generation you're from, that may just be kind of like the standard and kind of the expectation that you move around, you try a lot of things. But I think at the core of most people is this desire to connect to something that matters, be it a team or a mission or something that just gives them the runway to be able to kind of live the life they want to live. So, let's talk about the tension between an owner who's trying to grow and build a business and kind of managing expectations of building a team across multiple generations and expectations.
Well, I think that longevity is one of the most important things in a business. There's an old saying that people don't leave businesses, they leave leaders. And I think that is really true. I don't think most people set out to just leave. I think that given their preference, they would love to find a place to bloom, to grow, to expand, and to actualize who they are as a business person. But oftentimes they run into obstacles at companies, and that becomes, in their eyes at least, difficult or impossible to achieve. And then there's the whole other side of this, which is the effect on the business and the owner. If we have this constant revolving door of people in and out of our business all the time, we spend all of our time and energy interviewing, figuring out how to headhunt for the best person, and not actually focusing on our business and growing that business. On top of that, think of all that leaves the business when a person who's been with us a long time suddenly decides I can't do anything else here, or I've stalled out. You're going to have all this institutional knowledge that they've gathered over the years, they've accumulated of their particular skill set within the company, the core values that have been cultivated over years of being immersed in the culture. All of that talent is walking out the door. And so you're not just losing a worker, you're not just losing somebody who's been a part of your team, but you're losing something that's really almost impossible to replace overnight. You cannot replace years and years of a person sitting in a role, perfecting that role overnight. So it becomes imperative for us as business owners to figure out what our part is in creating longevity with team members. And if there is something we can do about that, we should try to. You're right. There is a culture these days of people just kind of leaving on a whim, but I think there's something deeper there. I think it has a lot to do with them not finding that purpose, not fitting into a company that really helps them actualize who they are. So to the extent we can do something about that as owners and leaders, I think we should.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you and I both have stories of people who I think, given the right set of circumstances and the right path to growth, would probably have stuck around. There's a disconnect, right, between the mission that they're on versus the mission that the company is on. And even as a leader, the kind of culture of the team that you want to build, like those things are not easy to consolidate a lot of times. So, what would be kind of like a 30,000-foot view of how to set that up for success at the outset?
Well, I feel like there's a set of principles that go along with any leader and things that they're going to have to do if they want to create this culture of longevity. And some of them feel a little counterintuitive. As a business owner, you got into the business to kind of do what you want to do. And you want to lead your business and you want to run your business. And I think it's very easy for owners to slip into this mentality that I own it and everybody is going to fall in line and adapt to me and my style. And that's fair. It's valid. I get that. But I will say that I have found that to be a very difficult model to sustain as you grow. It's one thing if it's just you and one or two people working together, but I like to call it the clone the owner model, where everybody you hire has got to think like you and behave like you and adapt to your style in every capacity. And one of the challenges that brings to the table is that you create this army of people who are just like you, who do everything the way you do, who think like you do, who operate, who process just like you. And it removes the diversity of thought in the business. It removes the backfilling for weaknesses. If you can only tolerate people who are gonna do it the way you do it, you're going to end up failing in business. You're going to be extremely deep in one area and very, very shallow in other areas. And I've worked with several leaders who struggled with that, that they really could not tolerate a different work style or a different process to getting to the same conclusion. It wasn't enough to get the right result. They had to get it in the right way. And I think that's where we're going to have to learn as leaders to grow just a little bit. Most of us as owners or leaders are very driven. We move fast, we go hard. And, the old saying is that everything's a nail and we're a hammer, and we attack every problem the same way. But the problem is these are people, and we can't attack people like a problem. We have to look at that differently and be a little bit more chess player and less checkers player, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's good. The analogy of playing checkers versus chess, setting people up for success before they ever walk in the door. We talked a little bit about this in one of our other videos, kind of two steps. One is as a leader, recognizing what are your gaps, what are your weaknesses. You want to make sure you're doing the opposite of what you just said. You don't want to hire a bunch of clones, because otherwise you just maximize and capitalize all the things that got you to where you are, limit where you can go next, right? The other piece is helping people that come in understand what are the values, what are the expectations, right? It's moving from leader centric organizations to principal centric organizations, documenting the things that are important to you, and then finding beyond you, how do you fill those gaps? And one tool that I've used, and we've used a lot of them, right? But recently, using the Working Genius assessment that's part of the Table Group, which is Patrick Lencioni's company. Really great tool to kind of encapsulate what are the strengths that you have as a team, what are the weaknesses you have as a team. And the thing that this tool does that others that I've used don't is really kind of do kind of a layered approach, so you can see everybody on a spectrum and kind of where your gaps as a team are, not just individually. And I think there are a lot of different types of tools, but I would encourage leaders to figure out like some sort of objective way to measure who you have, who you don't, who you are, what you need, and then go from there.
It's very good. And I would say, Brent, that having a tool like that kind of lets us get a little bit closer to the right way to lead people. We were talking about how you can't just expect everybody to be just like you. And to me, the alternative of that is we want to work with people to become the very best versions of themselves that they possibly can be. Not me. We don't want to turn everybody into me. We want to turn them into the very best version of themselves. And so that's going to be about helping people shine in their strengths. So we want to encourage diversity of skills, viewpoints, problem solving approaches. It's not so much about how we do things, but do we get to the result that we're supposed to get to in the business? And that has worked for me, caring a lot less about how we do things and caring more about the end result. And at the end of the day, I care about success. If you've got a way to get there that's different than mine, fine, let's try it. But we're not going to compromise on the results. If this person's style is so different that they cannot get the job done, that's a problem. And we're not going to be able to allow for that. So we're going to be sticklers, on the results, but we're going to allow people to, take different approaches to get there. And, utilizing tools like you mentioned are going to let us know who we've actually got on the team, and, maybe learn a little bit about, where they're strong, where they're weak, how they're going to approach these problems. And, more importantly, how we can help lead them in that process. Now, what I'm not saying here is everybody can just be themselves with no coaching. That's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is let's allow people to work within their styles. And then we might come alongside them and say, hey, that was a great relational approach to that problem. Let's work a little bit on taking direct feedback now. And we can coach them on some of those areas of weaknesses, but we've given them the opportunity to utilize their strength and be recognized for that and feel comfortable in their own skin trying to solve our business problems.
Okay, so what you're really talking about here is focusing on the results and not on, how you get there, which I think is a common trap for a lot of business owners because they've started, they have to micromanage because every detail is their responsibility. Why is trusting people so hard? for small business owners? How do they get out of that trap?
Well, it's your baby and you started it from scratch. You've been pounding away at it for years and you have figured out some things that really work well for you. But at the end of the day, we have to recognize as owners, there's some really smart people out there who are going to do things really differently than us. And so you can begin to paralyze and frustrate people when it becomes about how they do it and not if they get it done. I've learned that everything from dealing with employees to dealing with my kids, they're not going to do it the same way I do. So I quit focusing so much on did they do it Heath's way and more did it get done correctly? And more often than not, you'll be really surprised that you let somebody go, hey, here's the problem, go solve it. Here's what we're trying to accomplish. And stop looking over their shoulder about how they get it done and come back and see if they get it done. You'll actually find sometime they did it better than you could have done it. Their
Yep.
style was actually more efficient than yours. And then you'll start to realize, man, this is actually strengthening my team to have a diverse approach to each of these problems that we solve. But man, you can run some people off if you not only care about the results, but care about the way, if they did the exact steps that you would do. I'm not saying they should cut corners or break the law or anything like that. But if we're just talking about stylistic differences, if you can't, as an owner, get to the point where you can let go of that and focus on results, you will frustrate people who are not exactly like you. And let's be
Right.
honest, founder personalities are rare. You're probably 10% of the population. So if you're looking for people who are just like you in all aspects, it's a very small working pool. And you're going to end up struggling to hire people who will stay, or you're just going to churn through people all the time because you're wearing them out about their style. So focusing on results, not focusing on how they got to those results, as long as they're within the confines of our company's values.
Yeah, I love the idea of giving somebody a problem and just seeing, you know, how they solve it. I mean, there's two things there. One, if you really want to create a culture that's focused on learning and, curiosity and innovation, you have to let that happen, right? You have to let people kind of go figure stuff out within a set of guardrails that are going to prevent any sort of huge explosion, right? But how often have you done that and been surprised by somebody, right? I mean,
All the time.
I can think of a few examples where, again, I've done this thing the same way for years and years, and I'm trying to figure out a new approach. Well, because they've got different experiences and a different skill set than I do, it's so refreshing. And that, as a leader, you need that. You need those fresh perspectives coming back to you so that you can stay relevant and continue to be innovative in the way that you are innovative to the point that you got the business to where it is now, right? So being able to like set that framework for people, and like the example of kids is a really good one, right? Because there's and I think you and I have talked about this. Amazon has a culture of this. The expectation is that you go and you make mistakes, but there are guardrails to prevent you from making some catastrophic error that causes irreparable harm, right? But that is your role as leaders, to establish that playground where you can send those people out and figure out how to make mistakes in a way that isn't critical to the business or to themselves.
That's right. Having the ability to make non-fatal mistakes is the key.
Mm.
And as an owner, you kind of know what the boundaries for that are. So turn them loose on some things and let them prove their ability to think critically and to solve those problems. And you're going to have a team member who feels alive, engaged, and challenged and not stifled, but trying to fit in to a style that is not theirs. There's an old quote, I forget who says it, but it says, if you tell a fish to climb a tree, it'll spend its entire life thinking that it's useless
Mm.
because a fish is not designed to climb a tree. But you put that fish in the water, it'll thrive. It's the same concept, allowing people to be in a style and an environment that is that they're naturally made for is going to allow them to flourish. But we've got to let them do that as owners. If we force those fish to climb trees every day, they are eventually going to look for a pond, and you're going to lose that team member.
So I had a boss. We'll call him a boss because that's what he was. Who was a micromanager. He had very specific standards in terms of how he wanted things done. And even if you did them exactly the way he told you, he would still find something wrong if it didn't turn out exactly the way that he told you to do it, right? Because he didn't want any sort of accountability. So that's the thing. How do you balance releasing control but also keeping accountability? Because you have to those two things have, a reciprocal relationship.
Well, I feel like that, it's you're going to let them go make the mistakes, and then we're going to come back and then we're going to coach on those things. And we're going to look at what happened. And I always call it debriefing with my kids. Let's take, for example, a test that we just took. Whether they get a good grade or a bad grade, we always debrief and we talk about why we got the result that we got so they can learn from the things that went well and they can learn from the things that didn't go well. And then the next time we are in the same scenario, we're going to remember the lessons learned, whether good or bad. So then everything that your team member is doing is an opportunity then for learning. It's really less about failing or winning and more about those learnings that they got from that process. And again, obviously, all this is within the confines of non-fatal errors. We're not talking about things that sink the company. We're talking about sending them out there to go out and try some things where they can learn from winning and learn from losing and then come back a stronger person, having not sunk the entire company. This one right here might be a little controversial. I don't know that a lot of people agree with me on this, but I'm going to tell you it is the way to lead people. I
Oh,
mean,
it's everything.
so many leaders, they think because they own it, they should be able to dictate how conversations go. And I am telling you, that is why I can step into a business with a leader who's struggling with people and turn it around in 48 hours because I start building trust with these people. And by communicating in a style that they're comfortable with and not constantly forcing them into a different style, I think it's interesting that people reject that.
Yeah, I mean, we've all got different communication styles based on our personality, based on our background, based on our family dynamic, based on other roles and jobs that we've had. So you can't expect everyone to respond to whatever communication style you dictate as the leader. Communication is a two-way street. That's communication 101. And it is in my opinion, it is the number one thing that causes a leader to be either successful or to fail is their communication ability.
Absolutely.
So, in terms of the different types of communication, walk through some examples there between being very direct, being relational, being data driven, analytical. Like what have you seen work in your experience?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to set some boundaries here. I am not saying that we should tolerate someone who has some sort of extreme communication deficiency. I'm not suggesting that
Sure.
we work around people who have all sorts of problems with their style and they can't be helped. That's not what I'm saying. What
Mhm.
I'm saying is that if everyone in your business spends enormous amounts of time figuring out just how to say things perfectly, just how to approach you, or whether today is the good day to talk to you because of your mood swings, you are killing your productivity and you're killing your people. So much of the conversation is just about Heath okay today? Can we go see Heath today? Is he approachable? What kind of mood was he in today? Or did he rip your head off or whatever? That
Yeah.
is
You gotta
not
stop
what
off,
you
talk to the assistant and be like, "What's the temperature?"
right. You don't want your team having to deal with it. And that is what I consider a little bit of a diva personality that's just like, bull in a china shop. I'm doing it my way. Y'all work for me. Get in line. Get over it if you don't like it. I don't personally ascribe to that. I feel like that as a leader, it's my job to pay attention to the team member that's sitting in front of me and within reason, try to figure out how I can adapt my style to make the conversation go better. And so I am a very driven, straight talking, high energy person. I love direct communication, but if I'm not careful, even when I think I'm being really kind, I will come across to certain personality types as a little scary.
Mm.
And so I've got two choices. I can scare off that entire group of people, or I can adapt just a little bit and see if there's a way for me to come a little closer to them. And guess what? They'll often come a little closer to me and buck up and toughen up just a little bit if I work with them on that. And
Yeah.
so I'm not going to be as aggressive and driven and straight to the point with someone who's highly relational, who wears their feelings on their shoulders. I'm going to take some time to shoot the bull with them a little bit, connect with them, build relationship, make sure that they're comfortable before we dive in. I'm not talking about 30 minutes wasted. I'm simply talking about a few minutes of connectivity where they can warm up to me, I can warm up to them. I may not say things as viscerally direct as I might to another person like me in the room.
Yeah.
People I've been working with for years who are wired like me, man, we just come out and say it. Man, I thought you were a real jerk in that meeting. What were you doing? Like, that's a very direct approach. And I'm going to say that to somebody that I've got a lot of years working with. We know each other. We know that we're good regardless of what goes on. I'm not going to take that approach with a relational person. I might slow it down a little bit and say, hey, that was an interesting meeting in there. Talk to me a little bit about what was going on when we were having that interaction with so and so, and just listen a little bit and let them kind of get it out.
Yeah.
So there's just little nuances that we can change in our style, but it requires us to be noticers of people and understand what causes them to tick. And so I spend a lot of time analyzing my people. I pay attention to their behaviors. Those people that are bouncing off the walls all the time and want to have a conversation, those are your very social types, and they're going to need a little bit of conversation in the meeting. Your people who are facts, figures, numbers, they tend to be dry, less emotion. Those are your analytical types, and you're going to need to lead with facts and information. They don't really care how you feel. They care about what you know. And so we're going to talk about problems through the lens of data, facts, and figures. And then, you talk about the spectrum between direct people and people who are a little bit less direct and who need a little bit more sugar coating. I used to use the analogy. I had this one team member. Most people, if you're flying a plane, you can come right in for a landing and put it on the landing strip. We're good to go. Not this person. We had to kind of circle the airport a little bit before I can land it. Let them warm up to the concept, especially if it's bad news. And then we're going to slowly bring that plane down after we've done that. You can't just hit them with it. And
Yeah.
so learning those different styles, it only benefits you as the owner. I'm not telling you this for necessarily their benefit. It does benefit them, but you're going to keep these people longer. They're going to want to work for you. They're not going to leave. So you can either spend a little bit of time adapting your style or a lot of time constantly rehiring, constantly replacing people because you can't grow some.
I love Michael Hyatt has a story about he had a leadership coach basically following him around, and he would go into a meeting and he had a very stern kind of look on his face, and he just kind of stared ahead, never changed his expression. After the meeting, she said, "Hey, are you okay? Everything okay?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm great. Why?" She's like, "You should probably tell your face because the way it's coming across is that you weren't engaged with anybody, you weren't warm, you weren't relational at all." And he said that was a seminal moment in his leadership, is just that self-awareness. So I'm curious, because I know you have known you a long time. I know you are a direct speaker. What was the moment where somebody gave you some feedback like, "Hey, Heath, maybe you should, ease into that conversation versus just coming in like bull in a china shop"?
I don't know there's one moment in particular, but I can think back early to my career when you and I were at Ramsey building our business. And I can remember several instances where something happened and I just unfiltered let it rip in a conversation about something that was bothering me. And man, the carnage in the wake of those conversations, every time I did that, was just so terrible. And at some point, I finally realized, okay, you can say the same thing without coming across the way that you are. And so what I started doing, I'm very much, if you know the DISC profile, I am a 99I and a 99D. So that means I'm very direct, very driven, and I'm also very social and like people and connect. So I decided to start leading with my I, meaning when I'm in front of people, when I'm working on things with people, especially if we're solving some problems together, newer people who are lower in the organization than me, I'm going to leading with my eye. It's going to be more like a sales experience where they're going to get to know me, lots of smiles, lots of cutting up, talking about their family, talking about what's interesting to them in their life before we dive into problems. And then I'm going to use a less direct approach. And that works with everybody but your direct people. And usually the D people in the DISC profile are about 10% of the population. So that means with 90% of people, if you just use a little bit more of a social approach, it's going to go down smoother than it would if you take that direct approach. And then obviously with my more direct people, that's when you can kind of relax and just be yourself and say what you want to say. And I also say that the longer you work with someone and get to know them, you have this savings account of experience together where you've done so many things and solved so many problems together that if you're a little more direct, it's not a big deal because we know where that person's coming from. We know
Yeah.
their heart, we know it's good. Our colleague Rebecca that we worked with for years, she started as my personal assistant, worked her way all the way up to a vice president of our largest division of the company working with me. And in the early years, she and I worked together. I was very much more kit gloves and was, we talked a lot differently, more relational, more, again, kind of circling the airport, so to speak, before I would land the plane. But we went to battle together so much and we solved so many problems together, people problems, business problems, you name it, that before you knew it, it just got easier and easier for both of us to sort of just kind of take off the gloves and just say what we think. And towards the end, there was nobody that I was more direct to the point we kind of joked about. We would kind of pop each other in meetings in front of people for
Hmm.
fun because we just had such a rapport. And people like, but it worked for us. And that nothing's better than that. But here's the catch. We got to that point because of so many years of working together. And that only happened because I was strategic in how I led her and spoke to her and worked with her over the years so that we could actually get to the point where the trust was so high, we didn't have to worry about all the little accoutrements that went with the communication style. We could just be ourselves. But that only comes from years of working together and building trust. But I'm going to tell you what, when you get to that point with a team member, the level of efficiency that brings to the business. Dave always used to say to us that business moves at the speed of trust. That is so true. You can dispense with all of the kabuki dance that goes with leading up to something and just say it. But you can't do that overnight. You have to work your way up by building trust with people. And when you do it, it leads to huge efficiencies in your business.
Yeah, that's really good. I remember y'all had a few years already together by the time I joined the team, and I remember there were a few meetings I was like, man, these this is I don't know. At first I thought they were y'all are either dysfunctional or you're like brother and sister, but yeah, it was uncomfortable at first, but then later on it was once I was like at that level, it was like, oh yeah, this is how it should be, right?
Yeah, and you have that's the thing, you have different styles with different leaders. And they're going to get different things from me earlier on in their career as we're learning each other and kind of our boundaries and stuff. And there's not every team member you're going to get there with. Some people are always going to need
Mhm.
a little bit more of that kit gloves approach, and that's fine as long as they get the work done. But it is very refreshing to work your way into that kind of relationship with someone. But regardless, what we're doing here is we're considering others in our communication style. We're not forcing everyone to adapt to the owner. And by the way, this is important. It requires something of the owner. It requires something of the leader. It's not the lazy approach. And that's what I want you guys to hear as leaders out there is that you can't be the diva of the organization that everyone has to work around. If you want everybody else to learn how to lead well and think about how they're communicating, you've got to do it too. You can't just go, well, I founded the company, so y'all figure out dealing with me. I have dealt with that and it slows the organization down. But if you can step up and you can set the example by your working with the people who report to you and working on your style with them, it's going to filter down into the company and your company will be more efficient as a result of it. And your people are going to stay longer.
When it comes to longevity and building a culture of, a team that really wants to be around for the long haul, there's a lot to unpack here. So come back for the next part of this conversation and we'll dig in even more. Like this video, subscribe to this channel. We'll be back. Thanks for checking us out.